This is going to be a very interesting video. It's not something I normally do, and I don't think I'll do this again. But this is going to be, as the title suggests, an extremely opinionated tier list of Chosen the Sky the Third, Nightmare New Game, but also just kind of an afterthought of me finally finishing Sora. And I had a script written out for this whole thing, and then I realized that the script was getting too long, and I typically don't like doing scripted content anyway. So I just said screw it to the script, and I just decided to start rambling instead. I'm gonna divide this, what I think would be a super long video, into subsections in the description, which should be reflected in the timing bar as well when this goes on YouTube. But first, I'm just going to open up with a little bit of an afterthought on finishing Trails. I think I first got into Falcom games, or at least the Legend of Heroes series, in early 2000s, 2001, 2002, I believe around that time. You might be saying, hey, wait, Trails didn't come out during those years, and you'd be right. My first exposure to Legend of Heroes is actually through the Gagarv trilogy, and the first one I ever played was actually Legend of Heroes 4. To this day, my favorite video game of all time. Just do yourself a favor and don't actually play the PSP port. It is god-awful. I understand why people hate it. I played it. I wanted to puke. They butchered my boy. Just if you're gonna play, I'd rather you like learn Chinese or Japanese and play the PC port instead for the Gagar trilogy, because there's no Western PC port in English for it, at least not one I could find. But as I was 6 or 7 when I first played it, and as an impressionable young kid, it's had a really profound impact on me, and I still look to that series as the game that taught me how to live, how to learn, how to laugh, how to love, and it's still one of my primary sources of inspiration in life. It sounds freaking stupid that you get that from a video game, but one, it was an impressionable kid, and two, just something about the narrative and world building and character development in the series as a whole, not just in Trails, but in even earlier Legend of Heroes games that might not even be that well known in the West, is mind-blowingly good. It was way ahead of its time a decade or so ago, and it still is very much what I consider to be at the pinnacle even today. But I grew up with the Gagarv trilogy, and I never actually played Trails. I think I regarded Trails in the Sky back in like early 2000s as I regard Cold Steel now, which is just, I don't want to leave Gagarv. In the same way, like, oh, I don't want to leave Liberal. I was really sad when I finished a trilogy. It took me 6 years to finish a Trails in the Sky trilogy. I started playing this in 2014. I was among those group of people that played FC and had to wait for SC to come out on Steam, and it was just the most grueling wait imaginable. And when the third came out, the reason why it took me 6 freaking years to finish it is because I purposefully held off going into Trails of the Sky the Third, because I didn't want to go into Cold Steel afterwards. I wanted to play Zero, and I wanted to play Azure. And there was just no PC port for them. There was no English port for Azure, and there was no English port for Zero. The chances of anybody that's actually in the Geofront team seeing this is next to none. But on the very off chance that it is seen, I would just like to express my sincerest gratitude to Geofront and all the lovely hardworking folks at Geofront. I don't think I can quite put into words how thankful and appreciative I am that Trails of Zero, or Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure, have come to English Western PC and will be coming as of the time of recording. And, I certainly wish them nothing but the best. And they've done something for me that even now, as I'm sitting here recording, it feels surreal. I just can't believe that 3 or 4 years ago, as I'm sitting waiting for XE news on SC, there were so many times over these past few years where I thought, oh, that's it, the Kiseki series in the West is dead. But lo and behold, and now all 9 mainline games, plus I guess Hajimare is coming out as well next year, or at least later this year, and probably like 2 or 3 years down the road in the West. I can't believe that I'm now living in a world where all 9 Trails games are in the West in some capacity, in some accessible capacity, and 7 of them being on a main distribution platform like Steam. And it's something that I wake up and I just feel happy, like nothing can go wrong, kind of happy. It's a day that I genuinely thought I'd never see, and it's thanks to the combined efforts of so many hardcore fans that were even able to see this. And it's something that's I can't quite process even today. I've already started playing Zero. Like the day after, this is the day after I beat the third. I'm recording this, and I've already started playing Zero, and I didn't think I would ever get to, just years ago. It just feels so crazy that I'm here now. So to, I guess, give Children of the Sky a proper send-off, I'm going to make a super long, completely biased, super opinionated tier list. Because I love tier lists. Who doesn't love tier lists? I'll try to make it entertaining. I don't consider myself that entertaining of a person. But before we actually get started, tackling what is easily my favorite game series of all time, and it's not even close. They're so far up the first place pedestal that every other game can just look up. I'm going to go over some ground rules on how this tier list is going to go. So rule number 1 here. This tier list is my opinion. I don't consider myself as a particularly good player. I jumped into this game with Nightmare New Game because I was a brat and I was like, hey, I finished FC and SC. I'm basically a pro. Let's do Nightmare New Game the third. Don't actually do that. Like, if you have any inkling of doing this for yourself, please save yourself some sanity. Nightmare New Game is awful to play through at some points. It was a fair challenge for the most part, and overall I did really enjoy it. It did certainly enhance my gameplay experience. It gave me the right push. The game did press me hard at so many points and required me to press back, and I really had to use a lot of strategies that I would normally never use, and in that respect I like it. I think it was a decent challenge. But at the same time, I don't think of myself as the best player or anything. I'm certainly not skilled. I'm not among the upper echelon, at least that's what I consider myself. I'm just a somewhat okay player, probably slightly above average at best, who managed to win this game in Nightmare New Game. And now I have enough ego to be like, hey, let's make a super opinionated tier list. So, don't take anything I say in here as fact. I'm not going to go out there and say, this is objectively the strongest character and you'd be stupid to think otherwise. I'm not going to do that. All of this is just my opinion. I played through this game. I had to use everybody. I'm just going to tell you who I think is better than others. Rule number 2. I am assuming Nightmare New Game. Nightmare New Game is a completely different beast. And easily the hardest part about Nightmare New Game is the speed modifier. Enemies have 145% speed modifiers on Nightmare. Every enemy in the game. What that means is out the gate, they have action 4.5 on you. That course doesn't actually exist, but with an action 4, you're still pretending as if they're 5% faster than you on normal. And that's with action 4, the second best speed course in the game. With action 5, or Onyx Gem, you are now 5% faster than them compared to normal. And this speed buff that they get is just absolutely bonkers. And it's one of the reasons why Nightmare New Game is the monster that it is, where sometimes enemies can just act 2 or 3 times in a row before you even get to move. And if you ever get surprise attacked in the early game, you just die. And that's on top of every other stat inflation they get. I think it was like 131% inflated offense stats, which based on just the weird damage formulas in this game, they do like double, triple damage or something stupid like that. And you can regularly hit zeros on them with normal attacks. It's weird. It's really hard at some points. But that's also the baseline that I'm using this tier list for. I'm going to be evaluating all 16 of these characters based on their viability and power levels in Nightmare New Game. Even if I do this... oh, excuse me. Even as I do this, one last word of caution. If you ever plan to play this, don't do Nightmare New Game. Just play something else. Alright, well, rule number 3. Characters on the same tier aren't equal. So what that means is I'm just going to do something here. So let's say if I did this, right? This doesn't mean that I consider these three characters to be on the same power level. I will be ranking them based on their power relative to each other in that tier as well. So the leftmost in this tier would be something like they are stronger than all the other A tier characters. So it's leftmost strongest to rightmost weakest. So definitely characters in the same tier aren't considered equal to each other. I will be rearranging them where it's like leftmost, rightmost. So the leftmost S tier character would be, in my opinion, the best character in the game, and the rightmost F tier character would be what I consider to be the worst. So it's something like that. Now, some tier lists do this, some don't. For me, I will be doing this. Rule number 4, availability for a character will matter, but I will never count this negatively. So what this means is, let's take Julia as an example. Julia is not probably not the best character. Like I don't think it's controversial to say that. But Julia is also available basically at the very start of the game. And for me, that's bonus points to her. And let's compare her to someone like Richard, who's not available until basically the second last character you get. I'm not going to count that. I'm not going to hold that against him because I don't think it's fair to be like, oh, you can only be used for half of the game. You're bad. This isn't Fire Emblem. This isn't like availability means you have less EXP or anything. Everyone gets the same EXP in the end anyway. The reason I'm giving characters early on a bit of a boost in the tier rankings is because Nightmare's weird. A lot of the fights in Nightmare, especially early on, some of them makes you genuinely feel like you soft locked. Like you're just sitting there fighting this one boss and it's just not dying and it's one-shotting all your guys. And you're just wondering, is this it? Did I lose? Am I just stuck here forever? And a character in the early game that can get you through each individual challenge does matter. It's not that I don't think it's fair to say this character is strong early on but falls off late, therefore they are bad, is entirely valid in this context, just because getting you through the early game means something. It genuinely should. And I don't think it's fair to penalize them. I don't think it's penalize them by exclusively looking at how strong they will be at the end and not consider how strong they are right out the gate. And it also allows me to evaluate power spikes at certain parts in the game because this is ultimately a very linear RPG. So we do consider characters as they come to us. So those are going to be our 4 rules for this tier list. We are going to be organizing this tier list by alphabetical orders. I'm not going by tiers or anything. I'm just going to look at characters in their alphabetical order by name and sorting them into tiers as we go. So let's get started. The first entry in this tier list is Agate Crosner. Honestly, this is already where the Nightmare tier list is going to be slightly different. I don't expect this to be too different from like a consensus tier list. There might be a few surprises, but in general, good characters will still be good, bad characters will still be bad. There's no... I'm going to try to stay away from like, oh, hot take, a trash character here is actually good or anything. But that being said, I don't actually like using Agate on Nightmare, mostly because his one claim to fame is Dragon Dive spam. He has the Wild Rage craft, which cutting his own HP by 70%, max HP 70%, it's not even current. He can get 150 CP, which allows him to Dragon Dive. And Dragon Dive spam Agate is basically his claim to fame, because otherwise he's actually pretty bad as a heavy hitter compared to some other characters you can deploy. That's not to say he doesn't hurt. He certainly is a very good physical dealer. But I think a general trend in this tier list is that crafts are worse than arts. With one exception that's coming up pretty soon. So that being said, how effective is Dragon Dive spam in Nightmare? Not that much. Agate is actually naturally pretty slow, especially when enemies move so fast. You don't actually get that much chance to Wild Rage. A lot of times, Wild Raging kills yourself. You try to Wild Rage and then you get put at such critical health, no other character can heal you in time, and you just get taken out after your Dragon Dive. Trying to Dragon Dive spam on Nightmare actually requires a lot more setup. It's still doable. It's still very, very doable. It just requires so much more setup that I don't feel like the Dragon Dive spammer works as well. If it did work really well, I think Agate will be easily high A tier. Like, he's a really solid character. Even when you don't consider Dragon Dive, you can just put him up front and have him hit stuff, and he'll be pretty good. But I think a lot of other characters does that job better. So for now, I'm going to drag him up to a B tier. That's where I'm going to leave him for now. I just don't like how Nightmare outpaces him so much that if you want to do the one thing you're known for, you probably kill yourself in the meantime. Next character in the tier is Alan Richard. So many people, I think basically everybody I talk to, or basically everybody in community, will just straight up look at this guy and go, oh, best character in the game. He's so good. His crafts are insane. And yeah, I agree. I think Falcon probably got drunk. Like, there was a developer who was programming in the AT delays for his crafts and just forgot to type a 0 at the end. Because this guy's crafts are faster than his movements, faster than his attacks, which seems so counterintuitive to me. Crafts are supposed to make you wait longer. This guy can just, like, even on Nightmare without a clock up buff, this guy can Ogre Slash 3 times before the enemy gets to move. That's a lot of damage, and he can battery himself very efficiently. Give him Lunar Seal, give him Headband, give him like auto CP regen, and later on, once you get into the final dungeon, you can give him the Soul Cores, and he just batteries himself. He's an infinite CP craft spammer. So how good is he? I don't think it's any secret that he will be the S tier, so let's just put him up there. But as more characters make it into S tier, I don't think he stays at the top. I do think there are characters that are better than him in Nightmare, which sounds freaking crazy, because this is a guy that is literally a one-man army. He will destroy people. But generally, I do think arts are better than crafts, at least in the context of Nightmare. Arts can't miss, arts do more damage, and you can generally cast arts a lot faster. And also ATS is just a stat that's less guarded. Arts defense is generally lower than physical defense for the most part. And Richard actually kind of suck at casting arts. His orbital lines are really good for a frontline hitter. I wouldn't expect a 2-line setup out of a physical offense like Richard, but he gets a pretty wide variety of crafts. But you'll never be using it because you'll be spamming Ogre Slash. And Sakura Morning Moon, not even get to that. Sakura Morning Moon is broken. It does so much single target damage. It's crazy how much it hurts. He's really... I can't say bad things about him, but I will say he's not the best in my eyes. He's very close to it. I honestly, at some points, I would have put him in A tier. But then I told myself, that's crazy. He obsoletes everyone in A tier. With his sheer existence, he obsoletes everyone in A tier. So we're going to leave him at S, but we'll definitely be shuffling him around a little bit as more characters make it up there. Anelace, next up. I really like Anelace. I think she's adorable. But how good is she as a character in game? That's a very strange question to consider, because we're not actually tiering Anelace in this tier list. We're tiering Genu. So we briefly consider Anelace without Genu, and she is in D tier. She is basically Estelle with a sword, and no surprises where Estelle goes, but I'll get to that later. There's nothing really shining about her. Her one utility outside of having Genu is Whirlwind Dance, which is a huge suction ability that has great utility from start to end. It groups everybody up for your art nuker to AoE them all down. But other than that, her offense is really middling. And then it all changes once you get Genu. And I think this is where the power spike really pushes her over the top. Genu is the best sword in the game. When you can first get it in Chapter 4 in Moondoor 5, which is a preset fight. You have presets, items, stats, and quirks. And I don't know why people think on Nightmare New Game, or a Nightmare in general, that fight is RNG. The only true RNG is who goes first. If Anelace goes first, then you can make that fight deterministic. You precast Hero on yourself to tank the S-Craft incoming. Then you just do Clock Up EX, heal yourself, Pedal Dance, heal yourself, and then you win. Like, you just win the fight from there. That's really the only RNG part of that fight. What do you get as reward? You get Genu, the best sword in the game. Genu is a sword that is on the tier level of a weapon you find in Chapter 6, but you get it in Chapter 4. So for a solid amount of time, Anelace is the strongest character in the game. Like, she is super fast for a frontline offense, very evasive, so she can actually frontline decently well. And thanks to Genu, she smacks Chapter 4. You take her into every fight in Chapter 4 and she will destroy people. Even without the pedal dance setup. Then you set up pedal dance on her and she was actually crazy strong. She does fall off once you get to Chapter 6. Other people, beat her out because on her own she's not that good. But then you go into Chapter 7, before the final dungeon, you do Sundoors 3, and you power up Genu to stronger than Zamorian weapons. And once again, Anelace becomes not the best character in the game, but she will definitely more than hold her own. She is probably your primary physical offense in whichever team you stuff her in for Phantasmagoria. Just off the back of Pedal Dance plus Genu being just pushing her over the top. I think she just does way too much damage with her sword. Get the sword. It's not optional. So all that being said, where does she lay on this tier list? I do think she's kind of still a one trick, really. Very low defenses, but very high evasion. Very fast speed, and that actually matters on Nightmare. She's one of those few characters that can actually move at a decently averagely fast speed, like a acceptable threshold, where she gets to act often enough to be like, well, you're not totally dead weight. I would actually put her over Agate. I will put her in B tier above Agate, just because this power spike is not to be underestimated. She is truly, for brief spurts of time in the game, the best character in the game. And that matters. So, if it's between S at some points and D at some other points, I'd rather just balance it out and put her in B. With Whirlwind Dance utility, with the Genu, I do think she is simply good. Speaking of not good though, Estelle. Estelle is your main character for FC and SC, and you can tell that she's kind of designed to be a main character. What I mean by that is she's actually very average. All things very average. Average stats all around. Average crafts all around. Average everything, right? Even her orb lines are average. It's 4-4 split. That's the most average orb line you can ask for. So in a lot of ways, she can do everything. But she can't do anything. She can't excel at anything, but she can do everything. If you're the main character, it's fine for you to be designed like that. In FC and SC, every character that's not Estelle specializes in something, and Estelle's just above average, all of them. And I do think Estelle is a really good character in FC and SC, but in the third, you take away the main character spotlight from her, and now she's just another character that joins your team. And then suddenly you realize it's Nightmare New Game, and suddenly Estelle is smacking people for 0 damage. Because a thoroughly average character really has no place in the game where she's not in the central spotlight. You relegate her eventually to just a support because her offense is middling, her defense is middling. So what you gonna do? You can't really cast arts, you can't really spam crafts that much because Hurricane is actually bad. Heartbreak is okay, but you wouldn't be using most of her crafts. Morale is probably the only one you use, even fringely. True Wheel of Time is a saving grace. I do think that S-Craft is really good. It's lifesteal, single target nuke. Definitely does not even come close to out-damaging Sakura Morning Moon, but the lifesteal is very valuable, and Wheel of Time is definitely a huge plus in her category. But aside from that, she's really not able to do anything. A lot of times she's just average, so you relegate her to a backline Earthwall support, and even then, there are characters that are better at Earthwalling than her. She's pretty good at it. So for a thoroughly average character, you might expect to be in the middle of the tier list, but it doesn't really fly in Nightmare, where if you don't carve out a niche for yourself, there's no reason for you to be used. I wouldn't put her in F tier because I don't think she's that useless. She's not completely unredeemable, but I'm going to put her in D tier. I just think that she's far too average in a game where if you're average, you're not used. You need a niche. Speaking of niches, Josette is F tier, and I'm everybody will put her in F tier. This is not a surprise to anybody. there are hipsters who'll be like, but my Josette's really strong. I mean, good for you. Any character can be really strong if you just stack them up. The problem with Josette is, for a backline squishy attacker, her orb lines suck. Well, her orb line's okay, but like her crafts suck. She takes forever to cast arts, even with cast 2. Her attack is lower than every other backline threat. Her defense is garbage. Her HP is... Actually, you know what? Enough people have crapped on Josette for one reason or another. Even if I put her in S tier, I'm going to try to find some redeeming points for her. Stealing? No, Shara does stealing better. Stampede. How about that? Stampede. Stampede is a worse counter, but Stampede has one utility, and that is a massive knockback. Unfortunately, Orbital Gear does that better. So, like, the general theme is everyone does something better than her, and she does nothing well. She has all area-wide Bobcat. Bobcat 2 is okay, I guess. It's actually decent damage. But you have Phantom Ray, so why would you need Bobcat? Like, a lot of times it's just Josette is dead weight. You would never actually have a reason to use her. Even when you stack her out, I got the 2% Abyss weapon drop, and I gave it to Josette, hoping she does some damage. She still gets out-damaged by, like, Zin with store-bought Knuckles. And it just doesn't seem good to use her. I'm doing this whole tier list without knowing anybody's base stats, but I do know how much damage they do, and Josette does none. Her only 2 redeeming qualities are Bobcat area and Stampede, which has very, very, very niche knockback utility, but even that gets outclassed very quickly. As soon as you recruit Agate, that's just out the door. The Stampede's horrible. Really, there's no saving this one. Josette's in F tier. And, minor spoilers alert, she's the sole occupant of F tier. Nobody else is as bad as her. So with 2 pretty bad characters out of the way, we're gonna go to Joshua. Joshua is good. I don't know if I can really state too much more aside from that. He's lightning fast. Even in FC and SC, I briefly consider Joshua as the strongest character offensively in FC and SC. There are other candidates now. For example, I think Richard is better than him. But Joshua actually does have an edge up on Richard because Phantom Raid exists, and Phantom Raid is so good. Like, Phantom Raid is better than Sakura Morning Moon just because it is all board and it hits so hard. And Joshua himself hits so hard. And a huge plus to Joshua in Nightmare is he's fast. He's fast enough to match up to the insane speed modifier that enemies get. And you can't really go wrong with having Joshua on your team. He's fast enough that you can always sometimes rest a turn away from the enemies, just chaining moves one after another. So, he's a really good character. Incredibly potent in the offense, and he's actually got really decent base bulk stats to back it up, and he can be very decent evasion as well. His downsides include his crafts, and you notice it's a general theme. I'm going to be talking about this quite a bit. Crafts that debilitate suck in the third, because every enemy starts to resist them. Very few enemies are actually vulnerable to a lot of ailments. Normal trash enemies are, but they're trash normal mobs. Every boss ignores like everything Joshua does. Joshua's crafts are things like AT delay, which is debilitation. Not petrify, like KO, debilitation. What else? There's like poison. Poison is debilitation. It's a debuff, so that gets resisted. Status moves gets resisted as well. Cloak and Dagger, Flicker, Evil Eye, like he has 2 AT delay moves. He has a dual strike that's really spammable and really powerful, but crafts that do damage are okay. Crafts that provide utility are amazing, and crafts that debilitate are generally bad, because you sacrifice damage for a lot of CP cost, and by doing no damage, whatever you're getting put out is also getting resisted, which sucks. And unfortunately, Joshua's crafts, they're all debilitating. His only decent craft is Dual Strike, because if you give him 2 CP recovery up accessories, he can perpetually Dual Strike, which means he outputs double damage, and his double damage is insane. You give him, you just stack damage on him, and he does like 8,000 to smack, which is crazy. He's incredibly potent at offense, and I think that puts him over the top. His arts are actually serviceable as well if you don't want to make him walk up for whatever reason. He's a really great carrier of the nothingness course as well, just because dual strike applies it twice. He's really strong. Like, just look past the fact that all his crafts suck, and then you don't really have to care that much because Phantom Raid exists, Dual Strike exists, he doesn't have any other crafts, and he can just play offense, and he'll be very good at it. So, A tier. I think without question. He's the pinnacle of an A tier character. Incredibly powerful. As for Julia, I don't have a lot of good things to say for Julia, except for her availability. You get her very fast at the start of the game. But how good is she at the start of the game? Her only saving grace here is Mirageburg. This isn't normal or hard, where her chain strikes are really good, but you wouldn't chain craft in Nightmare. CP is such a precious resource for a lot of these boss fights because you want the 200 CP breaks, or you just want CP for utility, that it doesn't feel good draining a ton of CP just to land some damage that a lot of other people can just get right. Julia has amazing chain crafts, but chain crafts aren't used that much. You probably use it to clear out trash mobs in like chapter 3 or something where you can't go back to the garden. But like, why bother? Her really great talking point here is availability early on, and she's pretty vital in killing things like Rostrum and Bennu, where you do actually need her to win those fights, and she actually excels very well. In the very early game, Attack Order is a good substitute for Clock Up. You don't have to spend 4 people casting Clock Ups, where you can just accept less speed and you give everybody Attack Order, just off 20 or 30 CP, and it's a really, really great deal. Mirageburg is broken. It is such an amazing craft. Too bad it's on Julia, who doesn't really do that much. Other than that, she's just a middling damage dealer. Very, very average. Pretty bad in the late game. But her early game availability does give her... I at least have a soft spot for her availability early game. I do think the fact that she actually gives you Mirageburg tank utility all game long and early on very valuable does bump her above like the thoroughly bottom tier. So I think I'm happy putting her in C for now. Next up is Kevin. So up there you go, my friend. What are the stats? Don't care. Oh, how good is he? It doesn't matter. Is he fast? Who cares? 2 words, Grail Sphere. Grail Sphere makes Nightmare possible. Don't at me, I will fight you on that point, and I don't think you can win that argument if you tried. Grail Sphere is the best S-break in the game, and nothing else comes close. There's a pretty solid contender, but even that gets very quickly outshadowed. Spear of and Spear of Lower are base. You use it for the one boss fight you unlock them in, and then you just immediately set your S-break back to Grail Sphere. Kevin with Grail Sphere makes every single fight in Nightmare possible. And I think they kind of knew it, because the one fight where you aren't mandatory, the fights where you don't have Kevin, you can tell those fights are not designed with Grail Sphere in mind. The Spider Sisters for when you main Ries and Estelle, that fight is totally winnable without Grail Sphere, but a lot of other fights just aren't on Nightmare. Enemies will catch you off, and having on command all crap attacks coming, quick block everything button wins you the game, and the game is not possible without it. I refuse to believe you can play Nightmare New Game without Grail Sphere, and just by that you put him in S, because he is vital. He's so vital and so good. And I've been talking about his stats suck or anything, but it doesn't. He actually has above average ATS. His orb lines are okay, serviceable, but he can double as a pretty offensive caster. You just wouldn't. You give him double CP regen and you just watch him be a CP battery. And the other really good part about him is his crafts are amazing. He has area heal, area cure, area CP battery. Mortal Punishment is great early. Crossgear Rage just falls off a little bit. And his only really bad craft is Gorgon Arrow. He has really, really good crafts. Like, even Sacrificial Arrow is amazing, because you just give up 60 CP and you fill everybody up by 40. He can actually act as a battery for a lot of other CP casters. He can battery for Richard. He can battery for Joshua. He can even battery for people like Agate or I guess Tita if you want. when Kevin and Ries are together, you never have CP problems, and that matters a lot. Grail Sphere is amazing. At 200 CP, it blocks 2 hits, which is like Earthwall EX. It's a skill that's so broken, you don't even get it. Only Luva gets it. You just get to watch it. He blocks 2 hits, and you block 0. He's just so good. It just, off one skill alone, he catapults himself to S tier. Speaking of, next up is Chloe. Chloe is my favorite Trails character, but this isn't the tier list for characters. This is a tier list on their viability in actual gameplay. So how good is Chloe in normal gameplay? Well, let's go back to the history, because Chloe is a character that you do have for a long period of time over the entire trilogy. So let's kind of look at her evolutions through the games. In FC, I think I can make a case that Chloe is the best character in the game, because Lich Christ is the best S-break in FC. It is the panic, oh crap, I messed up, get out of jail free card. You can be dead, you can be poisoned, you can be statused, you can have almost no health. Chloe will save you with Lich Christ. It's one button, everybody's back up. And that is true throughout the entire trilogy. Even in SC, I think when you get Kevin, I think I can still make a case that Lich Christ is better than Grail Sphere in SC. In the third, unfortunately, it's no longer an argument. Grail Sphere is far and away better than Lich Christ, even Lich Christ 3. But Lich Christ at 200 CP is also plus 50 defense, which is twice as good as Crest. And the defense buff actually does matter, because she does double as Kevin 0.5. She won't outright prevent damage, but she can sure as hell recover you from it. You just prevent her from being stunned or something, give her immobilization resists, but you don't even need to. Her ATS is also great. She has everything on one single Wormman line, which is one of the only 3 characters in the series to do so. And then people immediately go like, wow, 3 water slots, she's awful. But wait, I'll get to that later. Her other really good shining point is Counter, which is a craft that is so good that it's been persistently nerfed throughout the 3 games. In FC, for 20 CP, you did damage, you reduce strength and defense by 50%. In SC, I believe it no longer does damage, and you nerf it by 30% instead of 50%. And in the third, Seek still doesn't do damage, and you nerf by 20% instead. But even in the third iteration of Counter, it's still a really good 20 CP on command debuff to one target. Of course, most bosses resist it. I don't think I've ever actually used Counter in the third, except for a few situations. But I do understand why Counter in FC is absolutely absurdly overpowered. So they did take down its power as the games went on. I haven't mentioned Sanctus Novus because you really shouldn't use it. I think I used it twice ever across the entire trilogy. The third even knows it. You teach her Lich Christ 3 in the third instead of like choose Sanctus Nova or some BS like that. Because the game knows she is your perennial support. And 3 water slots on her single Wormman line kind of tells that story as well. A lot of people put that as a strike against her, and objectively, yes, it is bad. You should have Wormman freedoms. You shouldn't be resisted to 3 slots being on the same course type. But maybe that's a blessing in disguise. Well, you're going to have HP on her. You're going to have Mind on her. So that's 2 of the 3 first slots. The third slot is likely Yin Yang, because I think Spiritual and Reflect are both bad on her. And then you have actually a pretty decent nuke setup. But here is the problem with Chloe. Despite her really great ATS and the fact that she can be a really potent magic caster, in fact, I think she casts better than Olivier. But let's do a little bit of theory crafting with her Orban lines. She has 7 slots, 3 of them are water. On Nightmare, you need action, you need cast, so that's 2 more slots gone. You're going to need EP cut. Just because, you can't sustain high EP costs, and also it gives really great elemental values for AoE nukes, and you have 1 slot left. That last slot is probably going to be EP because you want some Mirage values in your tree as well. And suddenly, with 3 water slots, 2 casts, 1 space, and 1 Mirage, you don't have White Kahana. Because White Kahana requires wind. And it's such awkwardness that a Grey caster doesn't have White Kahana, among other things. And it seems like such a weird, asinine thing to happen to her, where you want White Kahana? Fine, make a really big sacrifice. Take out action. or you're not taking out cast, like take out action, and then you have an 80 speed character in the last dungeon that moves once after like everybody else's moves 3 times. Nah, I'm not gonna rip on that. I did that accidentally, but I didn't mean to do it, but I accidentally did it. It's still okay. She can actually go into Cocytus instead of White Kahana, which is an okay nuke. I personally don't like it. I think it takes too long to cast, but it's serviceable. If you want to do offense Chloe, in the third especially, she is a nuke. She hits hard. You wouldn't expect that from a support. There's a lot of really good points going for Chloe. And her detriments, which is just namely 3 water slots, doesn't really matter that much. You're going to have Lateral for free, which is such an amazing healing ability that nobody else can even viably get just because it requires so much water investment, and she just has it. And Lateral will save your life in a lot of cases. Healing is not as good as outright preventing damage, so I do think she's worse than Kevin as a support, but not by much. She's still the perennial support queen in a lot of senses. And I think that alone, plus the fact that she's great at arts, will put her in S tier. I don't think high S tier. I do think I keep her at the tail end of it. But that also brings me back to this argument. I do think Richard is less than Kevin. Like, that might be controversial, because Richard is a one-man army, but Grail Sphere, man. Grail Sphere. Vander is up next. Vander is basically male Julia, but he doesn't get Mirageburg. He has slightly more area attacks. I do think Righteous Witness is better than Trinity Christ. But still, you're not really doing himself any favors. He lacks Mirageburg, and really just kind of middling. His Roman lines really suck as well. He's an okay frontline bulk, but other people just does that job better. So I think he actually slots himself into D tier. The only question I had remaining is who gets placed above each other, Estelle or Vander? And I think I do this, because Vander hits harder than Estelle. He at least does more damage and is slightly bulkier than Estelle. And Estelle really relies on True Wheel of Time to become viable, and Earthwall to become viable. Actually, the Earthwall point kind of sold me. Being a better waller, if you suck at everything else, is probably a better utility. And I don't like Vander as a caster, so I do think Estelle beats him out there. So I will put Vander in D tier. I think that's where he lies. Next up is Olivier. Olivier has the perfect Worman line, but unfortunately, he's worse than Ren. And from a support perspective, he's way worse than Chloe. Requiem Hearts is a meme. It's a garbage S-break. Happy Trigger is okay. Sniper Shot is not really that well used. You just keep it in the back to cast, but I don't know why. Even back in FC, I've been underwhelmed as ATS. I've stacked ATS on him, and yeah, he's a pretty serviceable nuke. But if you're comparing the 3 prime ATS attackers, which is Chloe, Olivier, and Ren, I think Olivier easily ranks last. So I don't think he deserves an S tier placement. I do think his bulk actually catches up with him. His physical offense sucks. He's really only being carried by his amazing arts. But if we're just strictly talking about him as a nuke, he kind of sucks. He's slower too. So I'm going to put him in A tier. I'm actually going to put him behind Joshua, because I like Joshua has more speed, and Joshua out damages Olivier in a lot of cases. And next up, Ren. And this is where I'm going to make a case for Ren being the actual best character in this game. Nuclear Missile. Just the perfect Worman line. Everything you could ever ask for from a magic caster, she's got it. I don't think my Ren normal attacked people, like, ever. Actually, she might have done it 4 or 5 times in the entire game. The rest, you give her ingenuity, you can build whatever you want on her, and she will use it, and she will destroy people with it. Her magic attack is just off the charts. She's so fast. She does so much damage. And genuinely, it's a viable composition to just run 3 people who dedicate their entire lives to protecting Ren and keeping her up, so she can just keep on doling out spells, because she is just so strong. this amount of power is something that you beg for. Kevin might secure you a way to beat the game, but Ren really brings you up there. I think that if you never tried offense caster Ren, holy crap, do it. She does kind of get gypped by the game in this regard because her ultimate weapon, you can get the Zamurian Scythe, you can get the Abyss Scythe, you can even get the Phantasmagoria Scythe. None of those scythes give her ATS, but she doesn't need it. Her ATS is nuclear. She doesn't even need the weapon to give her more, and she still outdamages every other ATS caster by a significant margin. Her 2 striking points against her, one, as I just said, her weapon doesn't give her ATS, and 2, she's really squishy, like incredibly squishy. In a game where you think everyone's getting 2-shotted, you think that might not matter, but no, Ren's actually like, in a lot of cases, she actually gets 1-shotted. But she does so much damage, and it's just something that I don't think you can properly get over. The fact that you just have a nuclear missile sitting in the back, and if you have a nuclear missile at your disposal, why wouldn't you use it? And why wouldn't you give every resource possible to protect her for it? And she's one of those characters, and I think she's probably the only ones where you can justify 3 supports keeping Ren going at all times. That's not even talking about Potter Mater, which I think it's just a fantastic S-break as well. For someone that I didn't invest any physical damage into, Potter Mater did crazy damage. It outdamaged Phantom Raid at some points. So, honestly, for such a potent glass cannon, I'm really willing to overlook all of the defense problems she has. It genuinely does not matter. If Ren gets like 1 spell off, you have won the fight. S1, like the best character in the third Nightmare. Not even close. Better than Kevin. Better than Richard. That might be controversial, but really, it's... Without Ren, I don't think I could have beaten the game. Same thing with Kevin. Ries is up next. So, Ries is actually pretty above average. I don't necessarily think Ries' stats are bad. I think she's really good. Like, fantastic, in fact. And what puts her over the top here is, well, 1, availability, obviously, and 2, Holy Blessing, which, when we're talking about non-S breaks in the third, it is the best normal craft in the game. For 45 CP, you resurrect someone, heal them for half, and you give them 50 CP. You give her CP regen, and she can act as a battery. On top of being a battery, she is the best Earthwaller you can ask for. She's better than Estelle at walling. If you give her Time Gem, she will make sure your party never ever dies. Like, never ever even takes damage. A combination of Kevin and Ries can make anybody do anything. They will just never die. And even outside of the context of being a support, I think she's really great. Heavenly Spear is a consistently above average DPS S-craft. Her normal attacks hurt like hell, and her Orbital Eyes are actually really great as well. So she can do a lot of things. Her ATS is really great as well. And she gets the perk of being a secondary protagonist because her final weapon is insane for ATS. So fantastic cast times, fantastic stats for the most part, like at least in terms of the arts attack category. And Holy Blessing, Jesus Christ, Holy Blessing. I don't think she's better than Joshua, but I think she's for sure better than Olivier. So I'm going to put her here. Next up is Schera. Schera is an Arts caster with no ATS. Schera is an Arts caster with 2 Force Wind slots. Schera sucks. Actually, no, not really. Schera has 1 utility, which is Heaven's Kiss. Heaven's Kiss is an AT advance. You sacrifice your turn, but you make everybody else move immediately. And it's something that bypasses the speed comparisons. Nightmare, Heaven's Kiss becomes disproportionately good because the fact that you can AT advance people is something that's unique to her, and it is off Heaven's Kiss that she carves her niche. Not because of her arts attack or anything. I've never really regarded Schera as like a nuclear arts caster. I just don't think that's her role. But Heaven's Kiss, man, that puts her over the top. Unfortunately, Heaven's Kiss on its own is not strong enough to justify putting her into one of your 4 main parties. But in Phantasmagoria, where you have to use everyone, it's a really great boon to have, to just give everybody else on your team a second turn, and oftentimes that's actually enough of a burst to wrap up a battle quickly, or even force a boss to phase at a critical amount of health. I think it's really good. I have a pretty big dislike of Windcrafts. I think most of them suck. Especially when you get to the end, you see like Gale Lance, Ragnablast, and you're just like, what the hell are these? Gale Lance is pretty good, but Ragnablast is a meme. Aerials, and lightning is if you're talking arts nukes in this game, Time Mirage Space crafts are way better than Elemental. And Shara as a caster is kind of forced to go wind element crafts, which is way worse than like Cocytus for Chloe. Because at least if you go water, you can heal. When you go wind, you do nothing. Like, what the heck is even Sylvan Guard supposed to do for you in most cases? You put it on as a meme when you run out of stuff to do, but it's never something you consciously do. So as an arts caster, she sucks. As Heaven's Whip support, she's okay, but it doesn't really take her over the top. I will say she's better than Julia, so I'm going to give her the C1 ranking here. Top of C tier, probably. 2 characters left. Tita and Zin. Tita is great. Early game Smoke Cannon will save your life. Vital Cannon is a really good panic button. Satellite Beam is a really funny S-Break, but for the most part it's a meme. You wouldn't use your CP for that. And as soon as she gets Orbital Gear, you'll never press S-Break ever again. Orbital Gear is busted. Orbital Gear is unbelievably good. It's not quite like Ren permanently on Potter Mater good, but it's getting close. You put her on Orbital Gear, you give her buffs, and then you just watch her be unkillable, unstatusable, massive tank with charge knockback, which is just everything that Stampede on Josette wants to be, but is not. And early game, amazing utility, area attacks on normal attacks, which is freaking amazing. Her biggest strike against her in the early game is bulk. And really, if you want to like take her out of the fight against Bennu, for example, or take her out of the fight against Rostrum, for example, the biggest strike against that would be her bulk, where Rostrum would just punch her once and she dies. But aside from bulk, the early game utility shouldn't be underestimated. I think without Tita, you have to have Tita, first of all, but if Tita wasn't there, I don't think you could have beaten Bennu in early game Nightmare. And later on, as her bulk starts to become a real problem, surprise! When enemies are no longer being affected by Smoke Cannon, when Vital Cannon just isn't that useful anymore compared to Kevin's healing, or even Chloe's healing, surprise! Her bulk gets completely erased as a problem, and in fact, she becomes the tankiest character in the game. And that's just way over the top. Orbital Gear is busted. Tita early game is kind of good. And it's pushed her over the top. Like, don't disrespect Orbital Gear. And I know nobody's actually doing it. Orbital Gear is just so incredibly strong. It looks like a bulky, stupid Gundam mech, but it's really not. It will make Tita such an amazing frontliner. She's one of the 2 people in this game that can actually legitimately tank. And surprise, both of them are currently untiered. But of these 2 tanks, Tita wins handily, not even remotely close. A tier, up to A tier you go. In fact, put her over Olivier. Would I put her over Ries? Is the question. I think the answer is no, because I think Ries just has better utility. Frontliners are needed when you just Earthwall everybody. So I think Tita fits her way in pretty high, decently high A tier. Certainly one of the better characters in the game. Definitely a huge boon to have. The last character we have to tier is Zin. Well, first of all, I know where he goes. He goes here. But I don't know where in this placement he lies. He's worse than Anelace. He's worse than Genu, well, I should say. But I think he's better than Agate. I just don't like wall race spam that much. Zin's one claim to fame is Distend. True Distend is 60% strength, 60% defense. He can self-buff and then just start punching people. Kind of slow, but really bulky to make up for it. So he won't actually be in danger of dying. He will be very slow to cast. You just sit back, Distend, and then wait like a billion years until he gets to move again. He's just so slow, but he hits so hard, and he can tank really well. Without Orbital Gear, he's a really good tank. He would be the best tank if Tita didn't get Orbital Gear. And at some points, at some encounters, I think that actually matters. I don't think it's fair to say like, oh, all he does is stand there and be a meat shield, because he's genuinely really good at doing that. Distend is amazing. Meditate is amazing. He's Genbu is a really great S-Break as well, although for the most part I really wouldn't use it. I would just use his CP to sustain a lot of his other crafts. which I think are pretty above average for the most part. A lot of his self buffs, really over the board self buffs, like takes him over the top. So I think as a pure meat shield, he does slot well into B tier. It's something that you can't go wrong having in your party, although he doesn't really excel at like dealing damage or helping you kill people. He will survive for a long time, and you know, it matters. And in that regard, I'm actually... This is a difficult call to make. I think I do this. I just think that Agate is slightly faster than him, and that puts him over the top. But he just sticks in up front. He's a meat shield that doesn't die, which, yeah. So this is going to be the final tier. Obviously, I don't think a lot of it differs from the consensus tier list. I think if you Google Chosen Sky tier list, or the third tier list, you're going to see that one tier list everybody sees. For the most part, I do think it's fair. I don't think the hierarchy in this has really changed. I just think that some characters are way better than others. And the general theme here is really arts are superior and supportive crafts are superior. And that's how you can tell just based off this tier list alone. But that's going to conclude it for this tier list. Hope you found it entertaining if you stuck through the whole thing. And as of the time you're watching this video, I'm going to be moving on to Trails from Zero. And I still cannot believe I'm saying that. Bless Geofriend. Bless you all. I don't know if I would actually do anything for Zero. I think I'll just play it off camera for the whole thing and just enjoy it. Eventually move on to Azure, and then Cold Steel, and then Hajimari. Oh boy, I'm gonna have a fantastic year and a half, or however long it takes for me to get through all of these amazing games. I can't wait. I'm gonna have such a good time.